Robert Eggers' 2024 remake of the monumental 1922 NOSFERATU from F.W. Murnau has been my most anticipated movie, not only of this year, but of the last number of years. It's been a passion project for Eggers for a very long time now, having been transformed by the original when he was only 9 years old, directing a stage play adaptation in high school, and now finally bringing to life a script that he began working on 10 years ago. For those of you who've been following my channel over the past year, and especially the last few months, you'll know that Robert Eggers is my favorite director working today. I've absolutely adored everything he's done, and I am also a massive fan both of the original 1922 film as well as Werner Herzog's 1979 remake. So I was pretty much over the moon in the lead up to this one, since it was my favorite director tackling my favorite interpretation of Bram Stoker's original novel. Yes, I am sick, by the way, so apologies for my voice. I got sick on Christmas Eve, so that was fun. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a video on this one right away or if I would just wait and do the full deep dive down the line, but the people have spoken, and after seeing it, I really want to talk about it anyway. Now, this video is going to be spoiler-free, but I'll make a promise to you that I won't wait too long to do the deep dive on this one. So you'll be able to get all the spoilerific thoughts after I've gotten to see the movie a few more times and sit with it longer than a few days. I find that all of Robert Eggers' movies are like, they grow over time and my appreciation with them increases, so I don't want to do it too soon, but once I feel like I have a pretty steady opinion on the movie, then we'll do the full deep dive analysis type thing. At the time I'm making this video, I have seen NOSFERATU twice, and I'm planning on going at least one more time. I am going tomorrow, because it's not often you get to see something like this on the big screen. All right, so Robert Eggers' NOSFERATU is finally, I can't stop smiling. The movie's finally here. I've been waiting forever. And if there was ever a movie that I was at risk of overhyping and ruining for myself, it was this one. I don't cover news on this channel really, and I made a whole 10+ minute video on one promo image they released earlier this year, which I think speaks for itself. So let's start off in the simplest way possible. Is this movie everything I'd hoped it would be? No. Not at all, but give me a second. When I heard that Robert Eggers was going to be remaking NOSFERATU almost 10 years ago now, I had pictured something very different from what his vision was. I had assumed that this was going to be a very slow, crawling, creepy, and quiet film, something with a similar pacing and structure to The Witch, but with a lot more filmmaking experience in the director's hands this time around. This is not that at all, and on the first go around, I honestly had a fair bit of whiplash because of just how different it was from what I was expecting. Now, this isn't in terms of the way the narrative plays out or anything like that, because where that's concerned, the overall story really doesn't deviate much at all from the 1922 film. What I'm talking about here is the presentation. While I had expected something slow and quiet and intimate, Robert Eggers' NOSFERATU is much closer to a grand theatrical opera. Now, this actually isn't something new for me with Eggers' work. The Lighthouse, which I just recently made a nearly hour-long video about where I talked about it the way Robert Pattinson looked at that mermaid scrimshaw, was a movie that I was actually disappointed by the first time I saw it because I was expecting, well, something much slower and more ghostly. The Witch was the same, where I thought it was kind of boring the first time around, but I was also quite a bit younger when that came out, so there's that as well. And The Northman I enjoyed, but not nearly to the degree that I do now. I find his movies take some time to fully click, and I can already feel that happening here. The second time around, going in knowing what to expect was a much more satisfying experience, and the more I sit with it and think on it, the more I love it. And if things continue the way they have for his previous movies, this is just going to become more true. I suppose the first thing to talk about here is going to be the actual look of the movie itself. So Jaron Blaschi has been the cinematographer for every movie in Eggers' career so far, and it's not surprising to say that this movie is absolutely stunning, because Blaschi's painterly work always is, but this is honestly on another level. The visuals in this film are breathtaking, and do something that I feel like Blaschi is getting better and better at, that being making a movie look the way that the people who believed in the folklore would imagine them to look. The Northman had that vibe to it, and Nosferatu has it to an even greater degree. This movie is pulling very heavily from traditional vampiric folklore and a lot less from the way vampires have gone on to be portrayed in media, and there are things here that feel so weird and out of left field because of how we've come to know vampires, so having the visuals be this meticulously well done goes a long way in helping to sell the vision. I really can't undersell just how gorgeous every single scene of this film is. There are multiple sequences that were lit using only candlelight, where they'd have a ton of candles off camera casting the light they needed, and they'd move them around or blow them out or light them depending on what was required. That's the sort of thing where the amount of work that goes into it is so insane that you'd think no one would be crazy enough to do it. But that's how it went down here, and that care and attention is very clear. This is easily the best looking horror movie of the year, and honestly, maybe of any vampire movie? And there is some seriously tough competition there. The dark, snowy streets, the deep glowing interiors lit by candles, the grand mountains and fantastical forests. There's this like grand fairy tale playing out in front of you, and Blaschke has shown once again that he's easily one of the best cinematographers working in the industry. It's a constant throughout the movie too. It's not like there are one or two like standout shots. It's the entire thing. And of course, without spoiling anything, the final shot of this film is a masterpiece in and of itself. Lily Rose Depp was a big question mark for a lot of people because she hasn't really had a proper chance to prove herself as an actor up to this point on a big enough scale to convince people immediately that she would fit the bill. Her role was originally going to be filled by Anya Taylor-Joy, but I'm so glad that Depp got the role. Not just because this gives her a chance to show that she's got more in her than the idol, but also because she gives one of the best performances of the year. I love Anya Taylor-Joy, by the way. I'm really glad that Depp got to show that, like, what she's got. Ellen's arc in the original is one of the big reasons that I think that movie works so well, and the decision to have the story focus more on her the entire way through is perfect because it allows for so much more time to explore this fascinating dynamic between her and Count Orlock. Eggers decided to really lean into the fact that Ellen's character in the original was a sleepwalker, and during this period, they were often thought to be closer to the spiritual realm and could more easily communicate with it, and that's a really important part of her character in this version. I absolutely adored this take on Ellen's character, where she's always sort of got one foot off in the distance in some plane of existence that we can't comprehend, even when she's having a conversation with someone. Like, she's always being pulled there. The writing throughout the entire film is very poetic, but when Ellen starts to drift away into that other place that has been with her for her entire life, her language also shifts into the most like incredible vivid imagery and poetry in a way that I just loved, and it gave a strong idea of how magical and compelling that other place must be. That sort of connection with the spiritual world is what connects Ellen and Orlock together, because he's also in touch with that side of things as he's involved in the occult. So there's this great dynamic where Ellen is terrified of this evil she feels has been stalking her entire life, but she's also somewhat compelled to him because he exists within that place that she hasn't been able to share with anyone. Now, if you're not a fan of the very like tragically romantic takes on vampires that we've gotten over the years, don't take what I'm saying here as this being that. It's not at all. The relationship between Ellen and Orlock is much more about obsession and satiating appetites than it is romantic. Vampires have always been a sort of vessel to explore fears of sexuality throughout human history, and that's no different here. It's just being done in a much darker way than a lot of other takes on this story. Speaking of Count Orlock, there is a lot to be said about this version of the character. I'm not going to get into detail about all of it here because I don't want to spoil it. They take their time to build up to the reveal. It's meant to be a nice moment. But just know going in that this is likely very different from any previous iteration of the Orlock or Dracula character that you've come to know. Eggers has talked about how much unlearning had to happen in his own head while he was researching the folklore that this movie deals with, because traditional depictions of vampires are very different from what we're used to. All I can really say is that when Eggers said he wanted Orlock to look like a dead Transylvanian nobleman, He wasn't kidding. It shouldn't really come as any surprise at this point, given how important historical accuracy is in Eggers' work, but this is probably the most accurate depiction of a vampire to what you'd find in traditional folklore, and it's also probably the most accurate to Dracula's description in the original novel, which is interesting considering that this is not Count Dracula. You could give me 4 hours straight of analyzing every scene with the Count in this movie, and I would never be able to tell you that Bill Skarsgård is the one playing him. I'm not sure I can think of another performance, at least in recent memory, where the actor disappeared into the character this much. And Skarsgård's performance here is phenomenal. He's this dark, imposing presence bleeding into every scene of the movie, whether he's on screen or not. And it's been a very long time since we've gotten a vampire that was purely evil. I'm not saying I don't like when vampires are portrayed with more humanity to them, because that's one of the things that I love so much about the '79 version. But this take on the character is essentially evil incarnate, and it's awesome. There is nothing redeeming or sympathetic about this take on Count Orlock. He's this dark, looming presence lumbering through the air, spreading death and horror, and it feels like Eggers basically took the fear that he felt about Count Orlock in the original when he first saw the movie at the age of 9 and put that feeling into his movie. One of the big things that separates Count Orlock from Count Dracula is how Orlock sort of personified the plague, and I was very glad to see that returned here, even if the actual plague itself feels somewhat peripheral to the narrative that we're actually following. It's just a great way of showing how the evil that Orlock brings spreads beyond the main cast of characters. Nicholas Hoult is fantastic as Thomas Hutter. He's got a great face for films of this period, and this is honestly maybe the best performance I've seen from him. He does a really fantastic job, especially at selling how deliriously terrified Hutter is during and after his time at Orlock's castle, where he can feel that what he's encountered is so outside of what he's been aware of for his whole life and doesn't really know how to process the horror of what he's seen. There's this great, just petrified terror in his performance that really helped in building up just how inhuman and horrifying Orlock is. The whole sequence of Hutter getting to the castle is absolutely mesmerizing, and while we don't spend a whole lot of time at the castle itself, the impact that that section of the movie leaves is amazing. It's intentionally designed to be this disorienting, delirious maze where we don't really know how much time is passing. You can't ever really settle into a sense of space because of how we transition between rooms and how Orlock moves around. And holy sweet mother of God, the way that Orlock's shadow is used in this movie is fucking perfection. It's not just stylistic, it's used in such fantastic interactive ways that I adored. The original film still has better use of shadow than 99% of movies that have come since, and I was thrilled to see it used in a similar way here, but with some new ideas and on a much grander scale. Willem Dafoe as Professor Albin Eberhard von Franz, aside from having perhaps the coolest name I have ever heard in my 23 years on this planet, is of course amazing, which shouldn't come as any surprise. He's been in Eggers' last 3 movies, and it's not hard to see why they keep working together because the synergy between material and performance is amazing. Apparently, just recently, Eggers offered Dafoe 2 more roles, so it's gonna keep happening and I'm here for it. He's where a lot of the film's humor comes from, which there is actually a surprising amount of. This isn't a cold and bleak movie by any stretch, which is honestly what I was expecting at first. There's a lot more humor and lighthearted moments than I was expecting, and while I honestly could have used a little bit less of this, it still was fun. This is definitely Eggers' most accessible film, although to be clear, it's still very much his style of movie. The performances all around here are really, really great, with the only sort of sore thumb for me being Aaron Taylor-Johnson. He's not terrible, and there are some moments of the film where he's actually really, really great and sells the tragedy of his storyline wonderfully, but he feels out of place during other scenes, like he doesn't fully settle into the period like the rest of the cast do. The focus on the narrative side seemed less about trying to reinvent this classic story and more so on expanding on ideas that were laid out in the original, and then infusing the whole thing with more of the traditional folklore that doesn't get reflected in these stories anymore. Ellen's somnambulism being brought to the front and center as the whole catalyst for the story, and the way that Friedrich and Anna Harding are fleshed out so much more are great examples of what this movie was setting out to do. Robin Carolyn returned to do the score after doing it for The Northman, and my God almighty, He's bringing the heat once again. The music in this movie is so good and helps in making it feel like something that was dug up from the 30s and somehow made with today's technologies. It's a very old school style of horror film composition, and it's a perfect reflection of the film's deep, dreamy tragedy. Almost like a lot of the music is born right out of the sadness in Ellen's eyes and the darkness of Orlock's. The movie is incredibly emotional, and a huge part of that is because of how good Carolyn's score is. I've had a very interesting time with this movie so far, and part of that is because I think when you get super excited about a movie, it's unavoidable that you're going to start building up an image of what it is in your head. And when I left the first time, I was sort of disappointed because I couldn't let go of what I thought it was going to be. And then when I went the next day and saw it again, knowing what it was, it all clicked. And the more I think about it, and as I've been working on this video, I'm falling in love with it more, and I'm seeing it again tomorrow. Every single one of Eggers' movies has gotten better for me with each viewing, and I can tell that this is going to be a similar story. There's not much more I can say right now without getting into spoiler territory, but I will of course be making an excessive and indulgent video on this one at some point down the line to just gush about how much I love it. Eggers has once again delivered another masterpiece and made what I'd easily consider one of the best remakes of all time because of how well he balanced paying homage to what came before while expanding on the ideas that Murnau approached the original with an artistry that is so rarely seen and so distinctly unique to Eggers. This movie is not what I thought it was going to be, but it fucking blew me away with this dark, dreamy, lumbering fairy tale nightmare that I cannot wait to go see again. I am a giddy child. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.